go.
And here we go. Okay. In every case in which there is a Kiddushin and there is no transgression, the offspring follows the male. Which is this? This is the daughter of a Kohen, a Levi, or a Yisrael who is married to a Kohen, a Levi, or a Yisrael. In every case in which there is a Kiddushin and there is transgression, the offspring follows the defective one. Which is this? This is a widow to a Kohen Gadol, a divorcee, a Kalutza to an ordinary Kohen, a Mamzeres or a Nissanite to a regular Jew, or the daughter of a regular Jew to a Mamzer or a Nissanite. In a case of anyone who cannot have Kiddushin with him, but can have Kiddushin with others, the offspring is a Mamzer. Which is this? This is the one who has relations with any of the other arayos of which are in the Torah. In the case of anyone who cannot have Kiddushin with him or with others, the offspring is like her. Which is this? This is the offspring of a slave and a Gentile woman. Reb Tarfon says Mazirim can be purified. How? If a mamzer married a slave, the offspring of a slave, if he freed him, the son becomes a free man. And the Reb Eliezer says this is a slave who is a mamzer. The genealogical classes went up from Babylon, Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim, Kalayim, proselytes, freedmen, mamzerim, Nissianites, Shushukim, and foundlings. Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim may intermarry. Leviim, Yisraelim, Kalalim, proselytes and freedmen may intermarry. Proselytes, freedmen, mamzerim. Nissianites, Shushukim, and foundlings may all intermarry.
Okay.
All right.
Right, so now we get into definition of what is the Shasuki. Elohim Shasuki. What's called the Shasuki that we mentioned in the previous Mishna? It's where we know who his mother is, but we don't know who his father is. And that's why we say Shasuki, because when you say, hey, who's your father? They say, shh, don't talk about that.
Okay.
Okay, so the Shasuki is somebody who could potentially be a mamzer. Okay, Sufi. Kol shenesach min hashuk ve'eno makir lois avi ve'lois imo. Basically, he was dumped at the steps of the orphanage, and we have no idea, even if he's Jewish. Okay, so I mean, you go after Rov, but the Asufi is from Asaf. He's gathered up from the marketplace. He was dumped. The baby was dumped somewhere, and we have no idea who his parents are. Abba Shaulom haya koreh l'shasuki beduki. So the Shasuki, says Abba Shaul, is actually, he calls him a beduki. Now this is not just like a difference in like what's the correct terminology. There's a philosophical difference between the two, because beduki means go and check. Let's find out who his father is, because Abba Shaul is saying, okay, so let's ask her. Remember there was a machlokis in Kesubos between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, was it? Rabbi Eliezer, who's versus Rabbi Yeshua. When a woman turns up pregnant, and we ask her, and she says, no, it's from Ish Ploni B'Kohen Hu. Remember that from Kesubos.
Right.
And Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer say, "Nemenes, we believe her. We believe who she says the father is." And Rabbi Yeshua says, "Lo al piha anu chaim. We can't trust her. We maybe rather we have a chazaka. Rather we must assume that this is the child of a mamzer or a nasin, unless she can bring proof to who she's pregnant by. But the halacha does follow Rabban Gamliel, which means go and ask her who the father is, and that means and that will tell us what the child is. And the halacha follows Abba Shaul. So we don't talk about a Shasuki, we talk about a Beduki. Find out who he is. Okay. Mishna Gimel. Kol ha'asurin lavo b'kahal mutarin lavo zeh. Anyone who is asked to marry into the core congregation is nonetheless allowed to marry each other. Okay, so mamzer is not allowed to marry into the core kahal, but mamzerim are allowed to marry mamzerim. So that's all right. But Rabbi Yehuda Oser. So what does Rabbi Yehuda say? He asks as a ger to marry a mamzeris. Okay, but he agrees that with a ger from Moab and Ammon, that he's allowed, since he's not allowed to marry into the core of Israel, he is mutter to marry a mamzeres or a nasin, ubas shasukis or asupis, like the Tanakama. Okay, so while a ger, we say a ger is allowed to marry, the halacha does follow the Tanakama that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzer.
Okay.
Okay, but then of course it's not to his advantage, because now instead of his children being allowed to marry Kohanim, they won't even be allowed to marry Israel. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Vadan bevadan mutar. He says if you're a vadai mamzer, you're allowed to marry a vadai mamzer. Vadan besveken bevadan besveken asur. Right. So he says when you have the safek mamzerus, that can't marry anyone basically, because on the chance of that he's really a mamzer, he's not allowed to marry a Yisrael. And the chance that he's a Yisrael, he's not allowed to marry a mamzer. So he's really in a bind, because we don't know whether he's a mamzer or whether he's kosher. Either way, he could marry a ger, but again, his safek is going to carry on to the next generation. But so what is the safek? A shasuki, a sufi, or a kusi. He says the shasuki, so he holds like the Tanakama, that the shasuki is the woman who we don't know who the father is, or an asufi is a child who's just found in the shuk, we don't know whether he's a mamzer or not, so he's called a safek mamzer, safek Israel. The kusi, and the kusi is he adds the Samaritans into the klal of sfekos, because they're not so good at Gittin and Kiddushin. They have they don't follow halacha l'Moshe Sinai.
Right.
They don't follow the Torah Shebal Peh. Okay, and the halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer that when you have sveikos, you really up a creek, and you can't marry anyone else, even who's a safek. The only options that they have really is to marry gerim, who are sort of in between stage. They can marry in either direction. Okay, Anose Isha Kohenis. So he marries the daughter of a Kohen. Tzarech livdok acharei. Just a second. This is my bank is phoning me for some reason. Back to our Mishna. Hanose Isha Kohenis. He wants to marry a Bas Kohen. Tzarech livdok acharei arba imahos. He has to go back and check her lineage to make sure that that her lineage is kosher. Shein shmoneh. Actually, it's the 4 turns out to be 8. Why? You got to check after her mother, Ima, Aim Ima, and her mother's mother, the Aim Avi Ima, and the mother of the father of her mother, and her mother. Okay, the Aim Avi. So basically, it's a woman and her mother. So basically, the woman's mother and her mother, and the mother of the father of her mother and her mother, and the mother of her father and her mother. And the mother of the father of her father and her mother.
So at this point, we're still going back through the lineage of the mother.
Right. It's all to check out that these are all kosher women who are kosher the kahuna. Mm-hmm. Make sure that she really is to make sure that her lineage is what she says it is. Leviyavi Israelis, but if he's marrying a Bas Levi or a Bas Yisrael, Mosifin alein od achas, and they add on another relative that he has to check. Could go on ima, v'aim ima, v'aim ima. So back basically a further generation. So in other words, he has to check after her like 12 mothers, 6 from either side. Okay. So this is in times when we didn't have official records like this. Nowadays, I think we just rely on the fact that the previous generations have been checked, and we've got documentation for each person. Once we've got documentation that each person is kosher, we can kind of rely on that to check back further generations. So. That seems quite an onerous job. Like, how do you go back so many generations, especially when your life expectancy is about 40?
Right. And the daughter of a Kohen must be investigated through her 4 mothers.
Yeah.
But then the Kohen comes from the father.
Yeah, that's the
Right.
Kohana. But what we're saying is that the Kohanim had already we were makil on the Kohanim because they're already very makid on their lineage. But the Israelim and Leviim are a little more lax. So
Right.
therefore, if you want to check on their lineage, you've got to go back a further generation. Okay, Adkan, let's do Chazara.
Okay.
Thank
Base Aleph. A man betroths a woman by himself or through his agent. A woman is betrothed by herself and through her agent. A man gives his daughter a Kiddushin when she is a Nahara and by himself or through his agent. If one says to a woman, be betrothed to me with this date, be betrothed to me with this one. If betrothed to me has the value of Betruta, she is betrothed, but if not, she is not betrothed. If he says with this and with this and with this, and there is a value of a Betruta in all of them, she is betrothed. If not, she is not betrothed. If she was eating them one by one, she is not betrothed unless one of them has the value of a Betruta. If a man said to a woman, be betrothed to me with this cup of wine, and it was found to be honey, or of honey, and it was found to be of wine, with this dinner of silver, and it was found to be of gold, or gold, and it was found to be of silver, on condition that I am a rich man, and he was found to be a poor man, or a poor man, and he was found to be a rich man, she is not betrothed. But Shimon says, if he deceived her to her advantage, she is betrothed. Be betrothed to me on condition that I am a Kohen, and it was found to be a Levi, or a Levi, and he was found to be a Kohen, or a Nissanite, and he was found to be a Mamzer, or a Mamzer, and he was found to be a Nissanite, a townsman, and he was found to be a city dweller, or a city dweller, and he was found to be a townsman, or on condition that my house is close to the bathhouse, and it was found to be distant, or distant, and it was found to be close, on condition that I have a daughter or a slave who makes braids, and each in such a place. If he betrothed her in a different place, she is betrothed. Okay. Okay, Gittin, Sota.
Yeah.
Sota, there we go. Tafshir Aleph. From the time the Sanhedrin was abolished, song was abolished from the banquet halls. As it was stated, with song they will not drink wine. When the early prophets died, the Urim to Viturim ceased. When the temple was destroyed, there disappeared the Shamir worm and Tufim honey. And there ceased to be any faithful men, as it is stated, save Hashem, for the devout one is no more. Rabbi Shimon Gamaliel says in the name of Rabbi Shua, from the day the temple was destroyed, there was no day without its curse. The dew has not fallen in blessing, and flavor has not removed from the fruits. Has been removed from the fruits. Rabbi Yossi says the riches has also been lost from the fruits. Rabbi Shimon ben Eliezer says the cessation of Tahara caused the loss of flavor and aroma, and the cessation of the tithes caused the loss of the richness of the grain, and the common say promiscuity, I can't believe this, fooling around and sorcery brought an end to all. I couldn't get the word out. Okay. Sorry about that.
That's how you do it. Find an alternative word.
$12. If she agreed to bring him money, a silver seller becomes 6 dinners. The groom takes upon himself 10 dinners for the basket per 100. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says everything follows the local custom. If one marries off his daughter without specifying, he should not give her less than 50 zuz. If he agreed to take her in unprovided, the husband cannot say, when I take her into my house, I will clothe her with my clothing. Rather, he must clothe her, and while she is still in her father's house. Likewise, if one marries off an orphan, he may not give her less than 50 zuz, and if there is 50 sufficient in the coffer, they provide her according to the honor due her. An orphan who is married off by her mother or her brothers with her consent, and they assign to her in writing 100 or 50 zuz, when she becomes of age, she can exact from the hand what should rightfully be given her. Rabbi Yehuda says if he married off the first daughter, the second one shall be given in the manner that he gave the first one. And can comment, however, say sometimes a man is poor and becomes rich, or rich and becomes poor. Rather, they appraise the property and give her.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. Sorry, yeah. Cuff base Gimel. Cuff base.
No, just base Gimel.
If it is permitted to place the slats close to the wall,
hold on. Which Masechta are you in?
Am I mix it up again? Aramin. It should be mixed also.
Base Gimel.
Base Gimel, right? Okay. Rabbi Yehuda says Rabbi Yehuda says until 2 base saws. They said to him, they did not state 2 base saw except in regard to a garden or a kopef. But if it was a cold, a corral, a backyard, or a courtyard, even 5 koren, even 10 koren, it is permissible. And it is permitted to place the slats at any distance provided one adds slats. Rabbi Yehuda says if the general rule passes between them, it must be, if the general traffic passes between them, it must be diverted to the side. But they can come and say it's not necessary. Whether a public cistern, a public well, or a private well, they may erect slacks, but for a private cistern, they must erect a partition 10 tefachim high. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Ababa says they may not erect the slats except for a public well, but for the others, they must erect an enclosure 10 feet high. Additionally, Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba says a garden or a kopef that is 70 cubits and a fraction by 70 cubits and a fraction and is enclosed by a fence 10 feet high, we may carry within it, provided it contains a watchman's hut or a dwelling or is near a city. Rabbi Yehuda says even if it contains only a cistern, a ditch, or a cave, we may carry in it. Rabbi Akiva says even if it contains none of these, one may carry within it, provided that its area is 70 cubits by a fraction by 70 cubits and a fraction. Rabbi Eliezer says if its length exceeds its width by even 1 cubit, we may not carry in it. And Rabbi Yossi says even if its length is double its width, we may carry in it. Okay.
Make fast.
Okay. Base bay. If one placed a board under a pipe, if it has a I'm sorry, I thought I heard something at the door. If one placed a board under a pipe, if it has a rim, it disqualifies a mikvah. If not, it does not disqualify a mikvah. If, however, he stood it upright to rinse it off, then in either case, he does not disqualify a mikvah. If one hollowed out a cavity in a pipe to receive gravel, in a case that it is of wood, it disqualifies a mikvah. Whatever the size of the cavity, but in a case where it is earth.
I think you skipped a bit. If it's wood, then it's any amount, and if it's cheres, if it's
right. In a case that it is wood, it disqualifies a mikvah. Whatever the size of the cavity, but in a case
you skipped something there. I think you've got 2 pages stuck together, maybe, because however much wood it is, and then it says, and then it talks about cheres of earthenware.
I have here, if it hollowed out a cavity in a pipe to receive gravel, in a case that it is of wood, it disqualifies a mikvah, whatever the size of the cavity. But in a case that it is earthenware, it disqualifies a mikvah when the size of the cavity is 1 revius.
Yeah.
Okay. Rabbi Yoshi says also in a case that it is earthenware, it disqualifies a mikvah. Whatever the size of the cavity, and they spoke of a revius only concerning broken vessels of earthenware. If the gravel in it was loose, it disqualifies a mikvah. If earth fell in it and it was pressed down, the mikvah is still fit. A pipe which is narrow at both ends and wide in the middle does not disqualify a mikvah because it was not made to receive. Dalet, if drawn water and rainwater became mixed in a courtyard or in a ditch or on the steps of a cave, when the majority is valid water, the mikvah is valid. But when the majority is invalid water, the mikvah is invalid. Half and half, it is invalid. And when they become mixed before they reach the mikvah. When, however, they flow directly into the water, if it is known that 40 saw valid water fell in before 3 lugim of drawn water came down, the mikvah is valid. Otherwise, it's invalid. Okay. And Kulin. Okay, base test. We may slaughter neither into seas, nor into rivers, nor into vessels, but one may slaughter into a pool of water or in a boat on top of vessels. We may not slaughter into a pit under any circumstances, but one may make a pit in his house in order that the blood should flow into it, but he may not do so in the street, so that he does not lend support to the practices of the sectarians. If one slaughters an animal for the designation of an olah offering, a shlomin offering, a guilt offering, in case of doubt, a Pesach offering or a Thanksgiving offering, his slaughtering is invalid. But Reb Shimon declares it valid. If 2 hold a knife and slaughter, one for one of these designations and one for a legitimate purpose, their slaughtering is invalid. If one slaughters an animal for the designation of a sin offering, a definite guilt offering, a firstborn, an animal tithe, or a substitution, his slaughtering is valid. This is a general rule. Whatever can be brought as a vow or as a donative offering, if one slaughters for his designation, it is prohibited. But whatever cannot be brought for a vow or for a donative offering, if one slaughters for his designation, it is valid. Aleph. These are accounted treifa in animals. An animal whose esophagus is punctured, whose trachea is severed, if the membrane of the brain is punctured, if the heart was punctured into its cavity, if the spine was broken and its cord severed, if the liver was removed and nothing remains of it, if the lung was punctured, or if it was deficient. Reb Shimon says not unless penetrates to the bronchia. The abdomen was punctured, if the gallbladder was punctured, if the intestines were punctured, if the inner pouch was punctured, or the greater part of the outer one was torn. Rabbi Yehuda says in a large animal, a handbreadth, in a small animal, the greater part. If the amasum or the reticulum was punctured to the outside, if it fell from a roof, if most of its ribs were broken, or one that was clawed by a wolf, Rabbi Yehuda says one that was clawed by a wolf is treifa in the case of small animals, but only if it clawed by the lion in the case of a large animal. One was that clawed by the nates in the case of a small fowl, or one that was clawed by a gas in the case of large fowl. This is the general rule. If an animal with a similar defect cannot live, it is treifa.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you for the making time. And what do we do tomorrow? Are you going early or late or?
Tomorrow.